to meet you, sir.
Simone.
How do you do?
Robbie.
Robbie.
And Rebecca, you know.
Okay.
Henri. Hello.
Hello.
We have a little token of our esteem for you for looking after our press conferences over the years. Thank you.
Wow. You guys will have to sign it.
We do.
Love you already. Again. Okay, well, pendant que les photographes s'affairent, je vous fais les dernières recommandations while photographers are at it for an extra couple of seconds. I'll remind you the routine. When you want to ask a question, please raise your hand a little bit ahead of time. A, so that I can see you. B, so that the ladies equipped with microphones going up and down the aisles can get to you. When you have the microphone, please stand up, introduce yourselves, ask the question, then sit down and give the mic back. Thank you very much. Gentlemen.
And lady.
And lady, photographer. Whoa, God, I had better be careful here. Okay, hello everyone and welcome to the press conference for Jimmy's Hall. Une fois n'est pas coutume, I will start with the gentleman who plays the title role. Jimmy Grelton was the only Irishman ever to be kicked out of his own country without due process. That was August 1933, and the actor portraying him is Barry Ward. Jimmy left at least two women behind him in Ireland. One was his mother, and the other is Una, Miss Simone Kirby. The man at the center of this table came to Cannes, I think, for the first time in 1969 with Case. Since then, he has become them. Them includes, for the second time, cinematographer Robbie Ryan. For the 10th time, scriptwriter Paul Laverty. I stopped counting since Hidden Agenda producer Rebecca O'Brien. And of course, director Ken Loach. And I guess the first question goes here. Yes.
Hugues Daillet, Télévision Belge. Hello, Mr. Ken Loach. It will be in English. It will be in English. Sorry to talk about that, but it's really a suspense mystery. You said it will be your last movie. We heard other rumors, then maybe the best solution is to have your word about that. Thank you.
I said that in a moment of maximum pressure when we hadn't shot a foot of film and the mountain in front of us was quite high. And I thought, I can't get through this again. But you come out the other end, you know, and we thought we'd just watch the World Cup and then see what the autumn brings. And maybe a little film or maybe not. We'll see how it goes. It's a hard job to give up, really.
Question over there, sir.
Hello.
Could you, yes?
Oh, can I just wave?
If you can.
Okay.
Yes, you can wave.
It's Jack Mulvin from The Times. You talk in the, Ken Loach, you talk in the production notes about how film can't really influence society. It can ask questions, but it doesn't really frame a debate. Is this something that frustrates you about the films that you try to make?
Well, I think we add to the public discourse. and probably just to a very small amount. And we can put ideas forward, and we can put a point of view forward or a perspective in the same way as you can in a newspaper column. And we add to the general noise of the discussion. If films were to have a big influence, that would probably be very negative, because they would probably endorse great wealth. They would endorse America as the home of peace and democracy and defender of freedom, and it would have a very negative effect. So I guess we've got to hope that films don't have a huge effect because of that. But we can ask questions. We can challenge authority. We can be subversive. But in the end, it's down to the people who go to see the film. If they carry that outside the cinema, then maybe we can have an influence. If it stays within the cinema, then of course it's not. But you kind of live in hope, I guess.
Maybe the people who really do change things are the Jimmy Graltons of the world. And although Jimmy wasn't particularly well known in Ireland, I think I think in all our lives there's the Jimmy Gralton type people in every single community. I was talking to I can see our journalist friend there from Greece, and there's lots of Jimmy Graltons there now who put themselves in great physical danger, who teach immigrant kids who are threatened with having their ears cut off by Golden Dawn. I mean, I think in any community in which you live, you will find the Jimmy Gralton type people who nourish their community, who try to build bridges, who nourish people by their company and their wit and their fun. And I think these are the people who really change things at grassroots. And in a way, I think we saw this film as a tribute to these very modest people who've got great imagination and great spirit and who give life to the communities.
Before this gentleman gets the mic, this film takes place 10 years almost after the wind that shakes the barley, which was here in Cannes and got the Palme d'Or in 2006. In your minds, is it part of the same diptych? Would it become a triptych? Would it become a and how do you think of them both in your minds?
Well, I mean, thanks, Henry. I think it's a very interesting question, and we were very conscious of this really because The Wind That Shakes the Barley plays against the back of a very complicated period in Irish history. You had the 1918 election when Sinn Féin won a democratic vote to break with the British Empire. And basically what Britain did was we crushed that. There was a violent response to that democratic vote. So we examined that, the War of Independence and the Civil War. And then 10 years later, we're looking at a period which on the surface looked like there was a possibility of great hope again. De Valera, who lost in the Civil War, led a party, and there was talk about support for the poor farmer, the labourer, and there was a sense that after 10 years of authoritarian regime with Cosgrove, that things were beginning to open up again. Jimmy thought it was probably safe to come back again, and so there was talk about a new beginning. And again, we thought that was a very interesting moment to look at. And of course, it coincided with this wonderful, charismatic man and the story of the Hall.
So, yeah, I mean, obviously the two films relate to each other, as Paul has said. We thought it would be interesting to see what had happened to the dreams that people had for independence, what had happened 10 years later. And as often happens when people struggle for their independence from a colonial power, the hopes that people had aren't realized because of splits, because of the old imperial power still tries to rule, even though not directly. So that what the country was like 10 years later is very interesting. And of course, as one famous man said, they changed the colour of the flag, but they didn't change the property relations. So that many of the hopes were dashed. And the two films do sit side by side. I mean, with The Wind That Shakes the Barley was a kind of bigger, more epic story. This is just a microcosm. It's just a dance hall in a country bog where some kids enjoy dancing, and they exchange ideas and they learn poems, and that's really dangerous. So that's it was the idea of of examining it just in microcosm that was attractive. But yes, of course they do relate.
Rebecca, do you want to add to this?
I think they said what needs to be said about it. I think it's interesting too, though, to do a film which is set in 1932, and we did a film about the Spanish Civil War, which takes place like 5 years later, and I think it's really interesting to look at the ferment and the way that minds are growing and expanding, and how society and politics is changing during the 30s. And so, in a way, Jimmy's Hall feels like the end of an era, but also the beginning of modern society and breaking through. And in a way, I sort of see the films as a trilogy.
Before we yield here, just a word to you guys. If you want to jump in, jump in. Okay, you don't have to be so demure. Go ahead.
Hello, Sperling Reich, Celluloid Junkie, Showbiz Sandbox US. Normally I'd ask Paul a question, since I always find his writing quite amazing. But I'd like to get a bit technical for Mr. Loach and Mr. Ryan, maybe. There were some reports while you were making the film that you were in the editing room and ran out of certain supplies because film is going away. And you've always shot on film and always edited on film. And so I guess I wanted to know, as you move forward, do you look forward to working in another medium? Are you concerned that or will you work in another medium? Are you concerned that you won't be able to use film anymore? And I guess for Mr. Ryan, the question stands as well. Whether digital is your future or whether you're going to try and stick with film.
And the second part of the question is, never mind. Good. Robbie?
Well, I think maybe Ken could tell the story about the editing tape first, and then maybe we get onto the longer subject of digital and film.
Yes, well, we not only shot on film, we cut on film. So the 35mm celluloid goes through the editing machine, and you cut the celluloid, and it's very good because it's not as quick as the digital, so you consider what you're doing more carefully. You can check on the cricket score. You can get a decent cup of coffee, and you work with someone. It's not a solo job. So it's a much more human way of working. But film, of course, is an industry like all others. So they want speed up. They want to cut down the manpower or woman power. So it's about speed ups. It's about cutting the people involved in doing the job. So it's all the pressure, as you say, is to go digital. But the celluloid has a real... Celluloid, you touch it, you see it, you just make one cut at a time. It's a much more human way of working. And it's a different quality, which Robbie will talk about. But what happened with Pixar was that when the sound and the picture are numbered, and to put the so that you can join it in so that the sound matches the picture. To put the number on, you need a special kind of tape to print through. We ran out of the tape, and to order a new batch would be very expensive because you had to order far more than we needed. So we sent out an SOS to all lovers of films and film and editors if they had anything in their garage. And we got this tape from Australia. We got it from lots of people, and particularly the people at Pixar found that they had some left. So they very kindly sent us not only some tape, which we needed, but a cartoon with us in the guise of their favorite characters, which was good. It was great to see it's like, I think, people like traditional technology. And we met one of the guys from there. He came over when we were mixing the sound, and we made a really good connection. So we're going to carry on cutting on film if there's another one.
One of the problems with cutting on film, though, is that the technology that you need for the sort of ancillary processes is dying. So there is only one projection theatre where we can look at our rough cuts or whatever in London. And numbering tape is disappearing. So all the bits that support us make it more and more difficult to cut on film. So we're just hoping that there's a museum somewhere that can donate the full set to us so that we can make another film.
We'll go and sit in it and cut it in the museum.
from a point of view of shooting on film, I think it's a similar thing to what Rebecca's saying. The things that, you know, create the basis for shooting on film are actually falling away, and there's a huge amount of new technology that is taken over. And just looking at you all here today, everybody's got a camera, everybody's got an iPad that takes movies. You know, it's gone a bit out of control, really. And the filmmaking process was a beautiful thing. For 100 years, it was the same basic equipment from the first to the most modern film camera. So the digital technology is a little bit frightening, but I'm kind of I always feel a lot more comfortable in the traditional way of shooting, but you've got to look forward and got to see the future, and there is a lot of amazing stuff getting done on a digital sort of platform, but it's just a shame one has to sort of supersede the other, and I was hoping they could all live happily together, but I don't know if that's going to be the case.
I just mentioned too that we're talking about the editing process. One of Ken's key collaborators for many years is Jonathan Morris, who I don't know if he's here or not, but he's been with Ken and Rebecca with over 30 years, Ken, isn't it? And I have to say, I mean, just for me going in to have a cup of coffee with them, I mean, I'll really miss it, because it's like stand-up comedy in there, in between. You know, they're cutting the tape, and Paul and Tony before that, and I mean, it was just a wonderful rhythm to it, and I wish someone had caught it in film, really, because it genuinely, it was great joy to go in there and just talk about everything and anything, and back onto the film again, then there's a wee break and back again. And Jonathan has the sharpest tongue in the world, and a very, very funny man. So it'll be greatly missed if it jumped to digital. I hope we can find it.
But to go back to digital versus film, and this is a question for you, Rob. Do you find that switching, if and when you switch, you will have to light differently, makeup will be different, wardrobe, hair, I don't know.
Well, certainly from the sharpness of digital, it tends to make the makeup people's world a bit more difficult, because everything seems to be a bit sharper. But there's ways, and like the irony of it all is you use older lenses on newer technology, because the newer lenses are sharper, so it's just like, it's a whole weird kind of mix-up. But I think, yeah, I would say, I've sort of forgotten the start of the question. I had a good point there. I was going to say something to you. Yeah, so sorry, I do remember now. I went to see two films in the festival. One was from the Dardenne brothers, and one was from Bruno Dumont. Both of them were digital films. They both shot digitally for the first time. And it was very interesting to watch a director's vision through a cinematographer transfer into a digital platform, and actually did it quite seamlessly. If I'd been told it was on film, I probably would have gone, yeah, it looks like film. So it made me inspired, because I think that if the vision is strong, the technology can, you know, adapt to that.
Okay. Question here, then here. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Reika Saka. I'm from Hungary. And to Mr. Ken Loach, I would like to ask about, I know there is a fixed story, fixed characters, but for example, for me, the character of the priest was very interesting, of the pastor, because he was a bit like in between some things. And do you have sometimes that even you have fixed characters, that you have some personal experience or personal feelings or memories in a character? If you could say a comment about the priest, and what is your relation to the church as itself?
Well, I think Paul should speak about this a little, because obviously he wrote the characters. But I think we were very concerned that the priests at the time who spoke against Jimmy Gralton were simply, as far as we can see, were simply very dogmatic, very strong, very fierce, abusing Jimmy, taking part in the anti-jazz campaign, jazz being the devil's music, saying that Jimmy would be damned in hell, and so on. And so we wanted the opposition to be more sophisticated than this, and for the priest to recognize the integrity of Jimmy, and to recognize the value of him, his worth as an opponent. He doesn't deviate from the church's line, but he recognizes he's a sophisticated man. He knows about the organizers in the States. He knows about he recognises his integrity and his passion. And he says at one point, "You're a believer, Jimmy. Like me, you're a believer. You believe in different things." And so, and then he's a man of substance, and he also has an interest in the music, in the jazz. What is it that's intriguing people? What is it that he's missing? And he has a sense he's missing that. But the ferocity of the church shouldn't be underestimated. Remember, 2 or 3 years after this, the Catholic Church sent volunteers to fight for Franco in Spain. So it was pretty strong. But on the other hand, of course, the church, like other big organizations, is not monolithic. So that there are those priests who have fought for the revolutions in support of the revolutions in Central America, the liberation theologists. But Paul, just say a couple of words about this.
Well, yeah, just very briefly, what's really important to understand, I think, is it's hard to exaggerate the power the church had in those days. It's really, really difficult to get our heads around it. I mean, we showed footage of the Eucharistic Congress in 1932, you know, when literally 1 million people, you know, went to Phoenix Park, and I actually interviewed some of those people, you know, and one died just shortly after we did the interview. So it was great to have that, to have that input. But I mean, the priest figure had such influence. You know, they almost believed they had magical powers. So there was actually a line in the script that said, "Well, we think the horses dragging sand will die." I mean, that was to frighten people. It sounds almost quaint now, but actually people held priests in such esteem, and they thought they had almost like magical powers, and they wanted to control absolutely everything. It was fascinating with Donald O'Driscoll, the historical advisor, looking at what they tried to control, and they were determined to control absolutely everything, not just education, local authorities, hospitals, health. They actually even wanted to try and control transport, but they couldn't find a way of rigidly making that work. It was just too complicated. So it was hard to exaggerate that. And like Ken said, I mean, we read the reports. They were almost too crude and too vicious. And to write someone like that it just wouldn't have been interesting. And so we just tried to imagine the internal life of a priest. You know, someone who had read some Marxism, you know, who knew about the Wobblies, who had read about the famine in Russia probably coming. And that makes the opposition more interesting and more sophisticated, and also makes Jimmy's story more interesting as well. So we just felt we actually, I think we went to great lengths to respect them more than the historical records seem to justify, to be honest.
Question to both actors, and it's the first steps that I would be asking about. What was your reaction when A, you were approached for the part, B, did you read the script? And if Mr. Loach gives anybody a script, and C, once you have the character, you just sit down and go, what the hell am I going to do with this one?
Well, I didn't know when I was asked to be in the film, I didn't know who I was going to play, but it was a Ken Loach film, so I said yes. And then I spoke to Rebecca, and Rebecca told me a little bit about the character, but I didn't know very much. And then Barry and I had to learn how to dance together, so we spent weeks in London learning how to dance, and then trickling of information about the film and what this dance was for and what this dance might be for. And then when we arrived in Ireland, we had a couple of weeks to do some research and to do some improvisations with each other, and we were given, we'll say, the first maybe 20 minutes of the script, 20 minutes or so. And then after that, it was just, you'd get maybe a couple of pages, or maybe you'd get nothing and other people would get pages. But it kept it really exciting. It was good.
The kind of advantages of that approach is, as we were getting the scenes in dribs and drabs, we as actors are experiencing the drama unfolding at the same time as the character is. So you're kind of always reacting. You don't have time to think too much about it, which makes for a more natural performance, I think.
Tell us about the prep, Barry. About your prep.
My prep?
I know.
My prep largely involved farming and dancing, often at the same time. I have footage of me on the bog, and when the farmer who was kindly allowing me to work alongside her, when she turned her back, I would practice some dance steps.
Is that footage on YouTube?
I hope not.
Question here, then over there.
Yeah, Mr. Loach, we touched the subject slightly your active humanity throughout your whole career. And there are so many, I mean, not only technological, in a technological sense, but also in society in general. It seems like the anti-forces of whatever you have been standing for has been very, very strong nowadays. In Norway, the government refused to meet Dalai Lama on the 25th anniversary for his Nobel Peace Prize, just for the sake of business in China. In overall, can you give some comments on the actual situation now and how you look upon that? Thank you.
Well, that's a huge question, and I'll try and be very brief, and I'm sure others will contribute to this. I think it's a huge issue of dissidence and countering the prevailing consciousness. I mean, the sometimes secrets that people don't, that the powerful don't want expressed, get out. For example, Chelsea Manning, through WikiLeaks, told us the secrets, some of the secrets of the Iraq War, and of the murderous things that were done in our name. But of course, it's not the murderers who go to prison, it's Chelsea Manning. So it's the suppression of dissidents, the suppression of counter voices. The biggest problem with an election today, I think, the biggest problem we've got, many of us in Europe, is that there is one political idea which is allowed currency, and that is that the free market, the neoliberal agenda has to operate. That's the only way. It's given by God. There's no other way of organizing society. And that anything that counteracts that is seen is pushed to the edges. And although we're a very sophisticated society with many sophisticated means of communication, if you challenge that idea, it's like you're challenging God. It's like you're saying the unsayable. So finding space for dissidents, and not only seeing them as dissidents, but as important alternative arguments that can actually protect not only protect the planet, which is probably the most important issue we're all faced with. So finding that space that Jimmy Gralton represented, that alternative voice, finding that space for the alternative voice and allowing the alternative voice to have a presence is a major question of our time, I think.
To go back to the title, Mr. Loach, it has two components. One is Jimmy, and the other one is the hall. So can you tell us about the hall itself? I understand, or I was told, that you rebuilt it in real-life size?
Yeah,
entirely?
Yes. It was rebuilt, and we held the dances there, and we had to dispose of it, as those who have seen the film will see, which was very sad. But I suppose the significance of the hall is it's a place, it's a safe place. It's a safe place where people can be who they can be. They can achieve what they're capable of achieving, whether it's sport, or whether it's learning, or exchange of ideas, or becoming politically active. Because Jimmy and his friends stood on the side of the poor and the dispossessed and took action on their behalf. So it's that safe space, and it's because it's a safe space for free spirits that it was under attack. But the place is like an emblem of that.
What was really nice about building the hall was the hall was, obviously made of wood and sited on a bog, and we built the hall in Glasgow, and then we shipped it out and we rebuilt it on this bog in Far Leitrim. But it wouldn't have worked if there wasn't a community with it. And any hall, any special place needs a community. And what was so fantastic about working in that area in Sligo and Leitrim in Ireland was that we found a really willing community to join with us to make the hall work. And I was really so one day really happy when one of the musicians came to me and said, "This is a great venue, we'd love to come back and play here more often." And it just, the hall, once the people were in it, had a life of its own, and it's a special place, and it was, we all felt very passionate about the place.
And what was interesting too was, really attracted us about the story. I mean, the Hall actually became a character in the film because people had built it themselves, with their own hands. And that, when we actually saw it being built, it made us realise just what an endeavour it was, how much money it must have cost, how many weekends after a day's work. So we actually went to the site of the Hall, and you can actually see the foundations poking through the grass still. There's a little sign there. You can still see it's, in the local memory. It's still a very, very important place. But, I mean, we've talked about politics and Jimmy asking the tough questions, challenging authority in his life. But, what was equally important for us was there was this place where you nourish each other. And I think people who are involved in politics are often accused of being po-faced and miserable and one-dimensional. But the people I know, like Jimmy Gralton, they've actually got a great hinterland to them. Jimmy was in prison. He probably danced and saw blues in New York. He worked on the boats. He was a miner. He was a docker, all those things. And, when you see people in these places, they actually do nourish each other. There's conversation, there's debate, there's wit and laughter. And I think that gives you strength for maybe the more difficult moments when Jimmy and his friends really had to take on the church and were called antichrists. And I think that notion of nourishment is absolutely really important to all of us.
Out of sheer curiosity, is there anybody still left in the area where you shot who actually lived through Jimmy's tribulations?
What was very useful,
plus.
We met a very old man who was 101, and he remembers the day. Well, I don't know if I can say. Well, you've all seen the film, haven't you? But I don't write this obviously. But he remembers the day the hall was burnt down, and he was blind in one eye, and he sat there in his kitchen over a whole fire, and he told us the story of his memory of what happened that particular day. But what was really, really important to us was Jimmy Gralton's family, and word of mouth passed down through the generations, which was really, really useful for us when we were, before we even wrote the script, was just trying to get a handle on things. And Paul Gralton owns the house where Jimmy was, where the hall was, and his father remembers stories from his parents who were very, very close to Jimmy's cousins. And so we heard lots and lots of stories about public events, that this event took here, the cattle restallment went back in place. There's lots of public things that we knew, but what was very, very interesting was when we started trying to talk about Jimmy's personality and what his relationships might have been, and we just had to imagine those because that type of thing is not passed down.
We'll take two more questions. Question here and then over there. Who has the mic?
Jason Cosner, UK Screen. One of my favourite parts or lines in the film is where they were talking about what's going on in Belfast, and the Protestants and the Catholics had sort of united, and then after an awkward pause, somebody said, I don't know if that's good or bad. And I wonder whether you think that sort of idea has resonance these days with conflicts all over the place, where actually maybe it's better for the authorities if the people aren't united.
Well, absolutely. Divide and rule, is an established technique, and the British narrative about Ireland is that the Irish can't stop fighting each other because of religion, and the British Army goes out of its own kindness to try and help them. And of course, nothing could be further from the truth. And the idea of two sides of the working class getting together spread horror through the British establishment. But yes, it's. I think it's very strange. I mean, the left marches under the banner of unity is strength, and yet stays sectarian, and the right wing plays the nationalist card, and yet capital is international. And that's a paradox that we've got to overcome. And the left has got to stop its sectarianism, and it's got to be in the parade whether it's leading it or not. And that's a problem that we've had for as long as I can remember, of sectarianism, division. This group not talking to that group, the Greens won't talk to the Socialists, and so on and so on. And I think that's something we've got to overcome, because the threat from the right is so intense now and so dangerous. So we've got to have a unity on the real left. But you're right, it's a critical point.
Question over here, then a question here. Go ahead.
Seamus McSweeney for Metro Éireann, which is Ireland's multicultural newspaper. I'm sure you heard of it. Run by Nigerians out of Dublin, so that'd be interesting for you to know. First, I must forgive you for calling your bad guy Sweeney, like me, but you know, we're used to it. Can I ask a question about how much liberty you took with the story for dramatic purposes? And if I can allow myself a quick follow-up, in what way you think it relates to Ireland today? The story.
What was the last bit? I couldn't hear.
The first part of the question. The second part is, in what way do you think it relates to, you know, you mentioned things like Golden Dawn and Greece and stuff like that, but in what way do you think this story reflects politics and society in Ireland today?
Well, in relation to your first part, we've actually done very detailed production notes, and we're very, very clear about what are public events and what are private. And so we don't want to deceive anyone about that at all. For example, in relation to, you know, Jimmy and the hall and his mum, you know, and what happened to the hall, the shots fired into it. They actually placed a mine at the doorstep one day, which didn't go off. We didn't have time for all of that. There was much more threats against Jimmy than we could actually have time for in the film. But we had to, you know, after talking to Paul Gralton and Jim Gralton, who were who by word of mouth were closest, you know, to Jimmy, it became apparent that you know, there were many things about his public life that we knew, you know, and about the hall, and there was reports in the press. But I mean, if you're going to try and make a film and make it three-dimensional, I mean, you have to delve into the intricate and the private motivations. And I remember asking Paul, I said, I mean, such a charismatic man, he was full of energy, you know, he would have been a great catch in the area, you know, for anyone. You know, I said, do you know any stories if he had a secret sweetheart? And he said something, he says, even if he did, we would never know. So in a way, we kind of embraced that and imagined that he had a secret relationship with someone like Una, and that's where that character was born. In relation to the priests, there were several priests in the adjoining parishes, Cosgrove, O'Dowd, and various other ones, and various bishops who had vicious sermons against Jimmy. So rather than having 4 or 5 different characters, what we tried to do was, as we talked about previously, we boiled that down to Father Sheridan and his curate to give kind of some sense of balance between the two many different types of points of view that were possible. There was all his friends in the hall. We knew there was a Tommy, who was you know, a bit of a wild man, and we just had to really guess and imagine all the other people who were teachers and did the boxing and did the music.
Sir?
Ninos Miguelidis from Greece, hello. It's a question for Ken and Paul also, I think. I mean, I suppose you choose the 30s in some of your films because you see the affinities with today. I mean, already some points were mentioned by Paul, that you have unemployment, poverty, religion, which is fundamentalism today, neo-fascism. But choosing to put the story in the hall mainly, which is, as you said, the microcosm, you choose culture, where you have through music, painting, Yeats, and dancing, to get people to get together and have a sort of to get political consciousness and solidarity among them. You avoid the unions this time. Is it a sort of commentary on today, what's happening with the unions, that they are out of date, out of touch with the people, and it's up to places like that through culture that one can sort of get together and realize what's going on in the world?
That's a good point. I mean, there were. This was in rural Ireland. The unions weren't really there, so it would have been. It would have had to twist the story to put trade unions into that situation. But Jimmy himself was a union organizer. It's just that this particular story didn't encompass that side of his activity. I don't want to avoid the second part of your question, which was the relevance of Ireland today, and Baron Simone may have things to say about this, but I think the situation in Ireland is the same as other European countries now, in that we're all in the grip of the neoliberal agenda, and that the big corporations are taking over, and the Jimmy's fight now would be against that. It would be for a planned economy based on common ownership. Those were the ideas that he fought for at the time, and I think they're even more relevant today. So I think he would absolutely be in the fight there. But the enemy has transmuted into the big corporations that are now across Europe and that control us all, that are almost beyond our democracy. And we know their huge corporate lobbying activity in Brussels, which actually determines EU policy. So this is now where the battle lines are drawn. And Ireland is suffering to that. Again, it's had mass migration, which apparently is slowing down, but people have had to leave to find work, which has been traditional. We've got mass unemployment throughout Europe. In some countries, obviously much worse than others. So I think that Jimmy would absolutely be in there in that fight, and he'd be rallying, trying to build a movement against the big corporations and the way they are determining every facet of our life now, beyond our democratic control. If I can just say one other quick thing about the whole, and we've hinted at it, but it's central to what we tried to do. A key element of it is the free spirit, is the joie de vivre of the people there. And as Rebecca said, it was through the kids of the area and also the actors, Simone and Barry and Aisling and the others, that adds a zest for life, which was crushed, was important. And I hope that's in the film. I mean, that just joy and enthusiasm and embracing of life encapsulated in the dance is very important to us. And one other thing is that these are, particularly Jimmy and also some of the other characters, these are politically conscious people. These people have known the War of Independence, have been through the Civil War, have taken part in political activity, have put families back into homes from where they've been evicted. They fought the class war absolutely on the front line, and therefore they are conscious and they can speak with some clarity about their experience. And what we've noticed, and I've noticed it for 50 years, is that for some people who write about films, this is absolutely abhorrent. They can't stand working class characters who speak with some knowledge about what they know and what they've lived through. They like victims and they're like criminals. And they might like a battered wife or two. But give them someone who knows what they're talking about, and be it a farm labourer, being a dock worker, being a miner, work on the ships. Give them something like that who can string two words together and they say, my God, this is didactic. My God, you're telling us what to think here. No, it's the characters. And they're great characters. And they're characters you so seldom see in fiction. And so I hope I don't sound defensive about that. But it's something that's been a running theme through the films that, that we've tried to do. And to give due prominence to people working class guys and women who can speak through their conviction and their experience. And I think they're great characters. So I hope some of you share my feelings on that.
That reminds me, Ken, one of the most vicious reviews after The Wind That Shakes the Barley came out, and the one that struck us was, even the train driver quotes poetry. It was the kind of contempt. And just linking back to your question too, for our colleague from Greece too, what was remarkable about him, when I worked in Central America for 3 years, and when that country was being crushed and destroyed, one of the most important things was its music and its popular culture, the popular poems. And it was the same type of contempt for imagined soldiers who write poetry. I remember the contempt that, who do they think they are, And so song and poetry And dance was absolutely massively important. And it was amazing to see that country destroyed and torn apart because it challenged power again. And in a strange little tale, it's funny how ideas come and go and wave and weave, and you think you've crushed them. Because Nicaragua was crushed, it was destroyed before our eyes. So it kind of gives me great personal satisfaction to all of us, and to Ken and the whole team who have made it, that this idea really came through a contact in Nicaragua. I met Donald O'Kelly there in the 80s. And it was Donald many, many years later who told us the secret story of Jimmy Gralton. And it's funny how, they think they destroyed that hall, they think they destroyed the Nicaraguan Revolution. That's why in the story, the young people in the film were absolutely key. And, especially the character, brilliantly played by Aisling of Mari. I think there are some kids you just see, despite their parents' culture around them, they will ask questions of their elders. And they've still got the stubbornness and the determination and intelligence, to take things on and to question. And everywhere you see that, everywhere you see it, and I think it gives you great nourishment when you think, ideas are destroyed.
Can I just add something here about the research? When we were, and just to demonstrate how true it is about these characters being sort of, people trying to disappear these characters. When Paul and Donald O'Driscoll were researching the character of Jimmy Gralton, there are missing documents in the Irish Library, and, people, they were actually properly removed. We can't find those documents, and, it's an example of rewriting of history. These characters shouldn't exist, and so I was really struck by the fact that Jimmy Gralton was somebody that the Irish tried to forget.
I'm afraid our time is up. Thank you very much, all of you, for being here. But just a second. Before we do that, I would like publicly again to thank you for this, all of you. And before I tear up, this press conference is ended.
Thanks, Henry.